President Trump is disruptive by design.
But this is an administration that is more about changing government than it is about preserving positions.
And to see where his second term is heading, we've got to know where we are.
Inflation and affordable housing, those are the two things people said over and over.
And how we arrived.
We don't think about the president as a whole. We just want to think about what he can do for us.
See how Trump swept the swing states in a nation divided.
There's a reset that's needed.
With revelations and lessons for elections to come. I'm Craig Patrick, and we're connecting the dots in this edition of Money, Power, and Politics. President Trump won the 2024 election by energizing people who feel left behind by two things: our economy and our culture. On the economy, when people are in financial distress and they see jobs moving overseas, promises of tax cuts and tariffs will resonate.
Oh, when people give me the middle finger, I just go like this.
Kim Ferris told us she's working 4 jobs to make ends meet and struggles to get by.
Because this year it cost me about $300.
And if you're wondering, well, then how can she afford $300 on this? Well, that brings us to our culture and how it makes her feel.
Just changing so fast, and I'm from old school, that I can't even keep up with it.
Versus the way Donald Trump makes her feel.
Everybody's together. You're a family.
So you're about 1,500 deep in Trump memorabilia.
Absolutely.
You said you're being squeezed by the high cost of things.
Yes.
That doesn't squeeze you enough to dial back on the Trump?
Not when you believe in something.
She believes our economy and our social attitudes have gone astray, from protesters who want to defund the police to the growing use of gender-neutral pronouns to transgender athletes and drag queen story time in schools, as uncommon as that may be.
Just the change of the morals.
And she believes she's looked down on and talked down to for not embracing it.
When I see a guy go into a classroom with nail polish on, it offends me.
A man with nail polish offends you, why?
To me, it's not normal.
And that's where Trump supporters can be highly sensitive when their beliefs are called abnormal. Why Democrats calling Republican beliefs weird may not be the best move to try to win some over when their strategy appeared to revolve around trying to win some over.
These guys are just weird. That's who they are.
And how attack ads like this can be highly effective.
Taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Especially against an opponent who's not as well known.
Every transgender inmate would have access.
And especially when the attack goes largely unanswered.
Kamala's for they, them. President Trump is for you.
Well, if you feel out of step or offended by shifting attitudes and ways of life, and you feel put down for it by Hollywood and progressive politicians and much of the media.
I don't hate the guy. I hate the people who vote for him. I think they're stupid.
Donald Trump's a smart one, and y'all elitists are dumb.
You elitists with your geography and your maps and your spelling.
It's almost like roaches voting for Raid.
This, too, will resonate.
I am your retribution. I am your retribution.
For Kim Ferris and many others, Trump became part of their way of life. How many bumper stickers you have here?
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11.
And it's how wearing Trump shoes and going to his rallies gives Kim something Trump's detractors may not understand.
It gives you self-worth.
That's why Trump has such a diehard base and why Trump is better at reading an audience and our political climate than his adversaries.
Make America great again.
And if you think this is all something new, listen to this.
Ronald Reagan for president. Let's make America great again.
Yeah, that was Reagan's slogan first. Now, there are big differences between Reagan and Trump for sure, but both were media stars, larger-than-life personalities who tapped into conservative culture shock. Here's Reagan on the hippie movement.
He had a haircut like Tarzan, he walked like Jane, and smelled like Cheetah.
Well, see, Trump used a big part of Reagan's playbook and also a big part of Nixon's playbook.
We owe it to the decent and law-abiding citizens of America to take the offensive.
Nixon ran on the promise of restoring law and order amid the disturbances and student protests of the 60s that look a little like the college protests of 2024. And Nixon popularized the term silent majority, while Trump, the forgotten men and women who resent being frowned upon for their values and beliefs.
We help people. We're just good people, Christian people.
So for those who don't get the appeal of Trump, understanding the common threads that drove Republican landslides for the past 50 plus years may help explain how a lot of Trump supporters like Kim Ferriss think today. Who do you think was the best president America ever had?
Reagan.
Second?
Trump.
Third?
I have to think of it. Nixon.
I haven't heard Lincoln yet. Coming up, we'll explain the Democrats' biggest mistakes, how it all fits a pattern, and the power of words and how we use them. Democrats lost in 2024 because most voters think the nation's heading in the wrong direction. President Biden was unpopular, and Vice President Harris would not or could not escape that.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind.
And President Biden lost support for 3 reasons. 1, he ran on the promise of ending chaos and the deadly and chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan, followed by chaos at our southern border, undermined that promise. 2, inflation surged on his watch. And 3, Biden and his team struggled to communicate and connect.
We finally beat Medicare.
Yeah, that one was a doozy, but I mean communication woes for Biden and his team well before an 81-year-old Biden melted down in debate.
80's the new 40, didn't you hear?
And that's one of the most important lessons that reeling Democrats can take from their losses in 2024. Democrats need much better communication skills. Words matter. That's the same Achilles heel that burned Democrats 45 years ago. Because in the 1980s, Republicans had Reagan nicknamed the Great Communicator.
They called it the Reagan Revolution. Well, I'll accept that. But for me, it always seemed more like the Great Rediscovery.
While Democrats had a president whose speeches came across as dour and scolding.
Too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption.
And then a nominee who promised to raise our taxes.
The budget will be squeezed. Taxes will go up.
And then a nominee who expressed less emotion than Lieutenant Commander Data.
If Kitty Dukakis were raped and murdered, would you favor an irrevocable death penalty for the killer?
No, I don't, Bernard, and I think you know that I've opposed the death penalty during all of my life.
But Democrats today can take a very timely lesson from what happened next. Because after Michael Dukakis flamed out in '88, a new wave of Democrats came along and dug the party out of the ashes by doing 2 things. 1, embracing moderates, and 2, teaching fellow Democrats how to improve their messaging. They were led by Al Fromm and future President Bill Clinton. They led clinics and workshops that taught Democrats to explain and sell their ideas by framing them on their core values like faith, family, work, mutual responsibility, and equal opportunity for all, and special privilege for none. Their values form the roots, the proposals form the trunk, and the action points and sound bites that sell it all fill out the branches. That's how Clinton revived the Democratic Party and later became known as the explainer-in-chief.
We're all in this together is a far better philosophy than you're on your own.
And it's how Clinton helped revive President Obama, who was himself an eloquent and charismatic speaker, but needed a lift to beat Mitt Romney.
If there's one thing we've learned in this election season, by the way, it is that a few words from Bill Clinton can do a man a lot of good.
But in 2020, the torch passed to Biden. And he figured out how to reduce drug costs for seniors and improve our roads and bridges and expand renewable energy and high-tech manufacturing and counter Russian aggression. But he could never figure out how to explain and sell that to the American people.
We're growing the economy from the middle out, the bottom up, not the top down.
Yeah, but see, from the outside looking in, when you go out from the middle instead of down from the top or up from the bottom with the left, and well, it gets hard to explain what you're even talking about.
Bidenomics is about building an economy from the middle out and the bottom up, not the top down.
And then he just simply branded the economy as Bidenomics.
Folks, that's Bidenomics.
Attaching his name to the state of the American economy during a painful surge of inflation.
It makes good sense, Bidenomics, right? It kind of flows off the tongue really well.
And then he branded his agenda Build Back Better.
President Biden's Build Back Better plan.
There is no political justification for opposing Build Back Better Act.
Which may sound more like recovering from hurricanes, which it was not, than free community college and lower drug prices and universal pre-K and making daycare and elder care more affordable and paid family leave. All things that were popular with voters, but just got lost in garbled branding. And then instead of focusing on what it would change,
It's a $50 billion investment in our economic competitiveness.
he kept trying to sell it in terms of how much money he'd spend on it.
Hundreds of billions of new investments are on the way.
When we're already reeling in debt, making it far too easy for his adversaries to tie it all back to runaway spending and inflation with his name on it.
Bidenomics is a blue-collar blueprint for America.
Oh, coming up, Bill Clinton helped Democrats recover in the 1990s, but they paid a price for it later. See how North American free trade cratered small towns in rural America and how it now gives Republicans a striking advantage. In the 1990s, when President Clinton won, rural America was evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. But now Republicans dominate rural areas with numbers that would have once seemed impossible. For example, in Florida, Trump won Liberty County with more than 83%. Dixie, look at this, nearly 85%. Lafayette, nearly 88%. And check out Alabama. Trump won Marion County by more than 90%. And Winston by nearly 92%. And so on.
The rural areas, those areas are voting pretty heavily for Trump.
And to understand why, we need to see what's changed in small town America. For example, let's take the town of Hastings, Florida, back in its heyday. Tourists packed the downtown shops while the town's farmers worked the fields.
I think it was a typical Americana of the 50s and 60s.
They loaded their rail cars and grocery stores with giant cabbage and heaping sacks of potatoes. It turned Hastings into the potato capital of the South, among other things.
We had gambling operations here, all kind of gambling operations, and moonshine. Lots of moonshine sold here.
His neighbors may not have wanted him to tell that part, or the part about the truck stop that wasn't really a truck stop.
And the waitresses had on evening gowns and these real dangly earrings and, big bouffant hairdos back in the day, rouge on their chin, and smelling of lots of perfume. And I'm 10 years old, so I'm thinking, this is the prettiest waitresses I've ever seen in a truck stop.
We'll stop them there because that truck stop is long gone, and so is the whole town of Hastings.
This whole issue turned out to be a defining moment for our nation.
In 1993, President Clinton signed the North American Free Trade Agreement. And then NAFTA flooded our supermarkets with cheap tomatoes from Mexico, and then huge tomato farms in other parts of Florida switched to potatoes and then squeezed out the family farms in Hastings.
In the early 1970s, you had hundreds of farmers here. And now we have, tens of farmers here.
And Hastings' dwindling residents eventually voted to dissolve the whole town. And small towns, much like it, also withered all across the nation. And a lot of the residents at least partly blame free trade. And that's where Trump's promise to raise tariffs may alarm economists who say it would fuel inflation, but it also sells through rural counties that were built on manufacturing or farming. Look at this. Fox voter analysis shows voters who favor increasing tariffs broke for Trump 71 to 27%. And those numbers correlate to the margins we see in counties that rely on farming in Florida and in Iowa and beyond. 71 to 27%.
Tariffs on foreign countries go up, taxes on American workers and families come down.
And Democrats no longer even have a ground game or even draft local candidates in a lot of these counties where 1 in 5 American voters live. Well, these are the areas where Republicans have well-run campaign machines and have effectively branded and stereotyped Democrats as woke or judgmental or out of touch. And again, Democrats don't have many strong local candidates in these places to break those stereotypes. And it's often local candidates who drive election turnout, especially in smaller counties, and the statewide nominees and the presidential candidates can ride their coattails.
The national and state Democratic Party brand is in a dumpster right now.
And the Democrats' problem accelerated in 2016 when Trump stumped for rural votes, and national Democrats turned their focus even more to big city suburbs on a mistaken premise.
For every blue-collar Democrat we will lose in Western PA, we will pick up 2, 3 moderate Republicans in the suburbs of Philadelphia. And you can repeat that in Ohio and Illinois and Wisconsin.
Well, Hillary Clinton wound up losing Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin. And 4 years later, President Biden won by gaining some ground in small towns. And as president, he approved billions to improve roads and bridges and high-speed internet access in small-town America and help family farms.
Folks, all these investments means family farms can stay in the family. Rural entrepreneurs can build their dreams. Your children and grandchildren won't have to leave home to make a living.
But Biden stepped aside very late in the game. Kamala Harris thought she could stem her losses by stumping in small towns and picking a running mate who grew up in one.
We will have rural America's back just like they've had our back.
But with such a compressed schedule, Harris had little time to connect. In fact, she released her plan for rural America October 15th, 3 weeks before the election when many had already voted, and then spent a fortune on big city concerts on the day before the election when most had already voted. While Trump discovered how to win over young men who don't always vote. Coming up, the growing cloud of certain podcasters as algorithms and social media influencers change everything. Well, President Trump breaks conventional wisdom in politics because it no longer applies. Our culture has changed. As USF Professor Emerita Dr. Susan McManus put it, we've gone from watching reality TV to mimicking reality TV to becoming reality TV.
Reality shows, regardless of what it is, whether it's wrestling or, some sort of talk show or dating program or whatever else, the one that can be the most vicious with their opponent is the one that gets exciting, gets people excited. We have come to that.
As the media splintered into thousands of sites and channels that tend to focus on either right or left-wing commentary, and as more people rely on social media for their news and information, and the algorithms play up whatever stokes passion and anger and plays down the rest, well, that plays up and normalizes vitriolic language, and it also separates and isolates a lot of people into factions in which they're only exposed to like-minded people. And the algorithms keep pushing stuff that just reinforces their pre-existing beliefs. And as research from Yale Law professor Dan Kahan shows, people are wired naturally to disregard evidence and facts that can contradict the political positions of their social group. In other words, people will even embrace unfounded positions and ignore evidence that refutes them if they think that taking those positions will maintain their popularity and acceptance within their group.
It's not enough to say the other side is wrong and here's why. It's almost an immediate step towards demonizing the other side. They're not just wrong on this issue, they're evil.
And successful politicians and podcasters get that. And it's why their online conversations can be rather intense and off-putting at times to the politically correct. And that's how a lot of Democrats may tune out a powerful audience that helped send President Trump back to the White House.
They call it low propensity voters, and they've done a phenomenal job.
There's a world of gaming, sports, lifestyle, and opinion sites that now has far more reach than legacy media. and they draw a lot of young men who are financially squeezed, with fewer and fewer going to college, getting outpaced by women in a generation in which single men are less likely or able to buy homes than single women, who may be less inclined to embrace feminist economics and movies that satirize masculinity and the age of patriarchy, and who may be more inclined to say things about that and more that might offend. And they don't like being scolded for it and lectured about toxic masculinity.
Over expressiveness of your testosterone.
Making decisions solely based on your perception of how manly it makes you appear.
It produced a tremendous untapped market of persuadable voters until Trump tapped into it and persuaded them by going on a lot of podcasts like the Joe Rogan Experience. Now, Joe Rogan is our nation's most popular podcaster. Edison Research shows his audience is 80% male and the majority are ages 18 to 34.
I spoke to this guy for 3 hours. Anyway, it's a great honor to be.
Yes, Trump spent 3 hours on Joe Rogan. Now, that in itself should be a teaching moment for any who may think the key to mastering social media is just posting 30-second blips. More than 50 million people watched this 3-hour interview with Trump. To put that in some striking context, on the very same day Rogan hosted Trump, this happened.
Cortez delivers. Freeman hits the ball to right field.
Freddie Freeman made World Series history with a walk-off grand slam in the most watched World Series in 7 years. That extra inning game lasted 3 hours, 27 minutes, roughly the same amount of time as Trump's conversation with Rogan.
I spoke to this guy for 3 hours. Anyway, it's a great honor to be.
And in terms of ratings, 15.2 million people watched that riveting Game 1 of the series. Again, while more than 50 million viewed Rogan and Trump.
I think it definitely influenced a lot of people's vote, just based on the podcast. Like, you know, that's a younger kind of population that will watch his kind of shows.
Well, Kamala Harris considered sitting down with Rogan, but in the end did not do it. And some Democrats said it would not have paid off for her on the premise that it's a right-wing influencer and a right-wing audience that would not have voted for her anyway. But here's another eye-opener for them. Look at the Edison Research on Rogan's audience. It does tilt Republican, but only slightly. 32% Republicans, 27% Democrats, 35% independent or something else, and the remaining few didn't say. Now, if that was a congressional district, that would be considered competitive. And in yet another wake-up call for many, Rogan may not be as hard for a Democrat to win over as some may think, especially if a Democrat took the time and interest to sit down with him. Just ask Bernie Sanders.
I think I'll probably vote for Bernie. Him as a human being, when I was hanging out with him, and I believe in him. I like him. I like him a lot.
In 2020, Sanders got Rogan's endorsement and promoted it, and then got scolded by a lot of progressives for promoting it and faced demands to apologize for promoting the endorsement because Rogan has said things that they call sexist or offensive to transgender women.
And you're right. I got vilified by some of the Democratic establishment because I went on Rogan's show. Look, you can have an argument with Rogan, agree with him, disagree with him, but what's the problem going on in those shows?
4 years later, Harris worked around those shows while Trump worked them from one to the other and gained 15 points among young men along the way. Well, today, around 100 million Americans listen to podcasts every week and counting. And Pew Research shows 21% of all adults now get their news from social media influencers. And for those under the age of 30, it jumps to 37%. And Trump's strategy revealed a eureka moment for political consultants, candidates, marketers, and many others, because he found success on platforms that many of his detractors shunned, that don't always focus on politics. In fact, they often don't. But it gave him a way to connect with a very large audience and do some things that his opponents may ridicule, but also go viral in a changing world that gave Trump the last laugh. For a closer look at the data and the shift in support among African American and Latino voters and other reasons for it and much more, check out the Fox Local app. Scroll down to the Money, Power, and Politics shelf, pick your topic and stream away. And tune into Fox 13 every Sunday for our next edition of Money, Power, and Politics. Thank you for watching.